The examination room was too quiet for what James Bennett was doing. Under sterile lights, with the doctor still holding Courtney Bennett's chart, he slid the divorce papers across her lap and told her calmly that he couldn't afford to carry her anymore. Not like this. Not with 3 children on the way. No one interrupted him. Courtney didn't argue. One hand rested over her stomach as she signed, her expression unchanged. What James believed he was escaping had already been removed from his reach long before he walked into that room. If you believe silence can be strength, stay with this story until the end. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if stories about quiet justice and consequences that unfold slowly resonate with you, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. The first time James Bennett began to measure his life in terms of weight, Courtney noticed it in the way he set his briefcase down. Not with care, not with habit, but with a kind of quiet calculation, as if even the sound it made against the hardwood floor needed to justify itself. It was late October in Boston. The evenings came early, the light thinning before most people had finished their workday. Their townhouse, narrow, tall, and carefully renovated over the years, held warmth in its lighting, but not always in its atmosphere. That shift had not happened all at once. It had taken months, maybe longer. Long enough that no single moment could be blamed. Courtney had been in the kitchen when he came in, standing near the counter with a glass of water she had forgotten to drink. The prenatal vitamins sat beside it, unopened for the evening. She had developed the habit of pausing between tasks, not from fatigue exactly, but from a kind of inward attention. Her body had become a place of constant calculation. 3 heartbeats, 3 futures, 3 unknowns moving in quiet coordination beneath her ribs. James glanced at her, then at the glass, then at the envelope of mail she had set aside for him. "Anything important?" he asked. "Statements," she said. "And something from the bank." "I didn't open it." He nodded, though he did not reach for it immediately. Instead, he loosened his tie, walked past her, and placed the briefcase on the dining table, with that same measured drop, not careless, not gentle, controlled. Courtney watched the sequence without comment. She had learned over time that James preferred silence when something unsettled him. Not comfort, not questions. Silence. It had not always been that way. There had been a time early in their marriage when he would talk through everything. Numbers, projections, frustrations, plans. He had been building something, then his consulting firm, his reputation, the sense that he could move through rooms and be taken seriously. Courtney had listened. Not passively, but attentively. She had a way of organizing his thoughts without making it obvious. Suggesting adjustments, noting risks, offering alternatives that sounded like extensions of his own ideas. He had once told her, half joking, that she made him sharper without making him feel corrected. That had been before the expansion, before the new office, before the larger clients, before the decisions that required more capital than caution. Now the conversations came less often, and when they did, they were shorter, narrower, focused on outcomes, not process, on results, not reasoning. James opened the envelope from the bank. Courtney did not move closer. She remained where she was, her hand resting lightly against the counter. Her posture composed, but not rigid. She had learned that proximity in moments like this could be interpreted as pressure. He scanned the first page, then the second. His jaw tightened slightly, not dramatically, but enough for someone who knew him to notice. "Did you see this?" he asked, holding the paper but not turning it toward her. "No," she said. "It was sealed." He nodded again, as if confirming something to himself. "It's nothing," he added, though he did not fold the paper away. Just a delay on one of the lines. Courtney inclined her head slightly. "Do you want dinner now or later?" The word came quickly, too quickly to be considered. It closed the subject without addressing it. She turned back to the stove, though the food had already been prepared. The motion was not about necessity. It was about continuity. Keeping the rhythm of the house intact, even when the conversation within it shifted. James remained at the table reading the document again. There were numbers on that page he had seen before. Figures tied to investments that had seemed reasonable at the time. Strategic, even. But numbers had a way of changing their meaning, depending on when they were read. A projected return could become a delayed obligation. A temporary gap could become a pattern. He exhaled, folded the paper, and slid it back into the envelope. "Courtney," he said, not looking up. She turned. "We need to be more careful. For a while." The phrasing was deliberate, inclusive but not equal. "Okay," she said. No questions, no resistance, just acknowledgement. That more than anything unsettled him. He looked up then, meeting her eyes for a brief moment. There was no accusation there. No curiosity, just presence. "You don't seem concerned," he said. "I'm listening," she replied. It was not the answer he wanted, or perhaps it was exactly the answer that left him without a response. He stood, moved to the kitchen, and poured himself water. Not from the glass she had left, but from a new one. A small distinction, one that passed unnoticed by most people. But Courtney saw it. The separation of objects, the quiet redrawing of boundaries. "When's your next appointment?" he asked. "Thursday morning." He nodded. "I might not make that one. That's fine." Another answer that did not resist, did not request adjustment, did not create obligation. James set the glass down more firmly than necessary. "You don't have to say, 'That's fine' to everything," he said. Courtney met his gaze again. "I'm not. I'm saying it's fine." The difference was subtle, but it existed. He looked at her for a moment longer, as if trying to locate something that had shifted without announcement. Then he turned away. Dinner was quiet, not tense, not overtly strained, just absent of the small exchanges that had once filled the space between them. The kind of conversation that builds a life without being noticed. Afterward, James returned to his study. The door remained slightly open, a habit he had never broken. Not fully closed, not fully inviting. Courtney cleared the table, washed the dishes, and dried them with slow, precise movements. She did not rush. She did not pause unnecessarily. Each action followed the last with quiet intention. When she finished, she stood for a moment in the kitchen, her hand resting lightly against the edge of the counter. There were documents upstairs in the bedroom drawer, unopened, delivered 2 days earlier. Not from the bank, not from any institution James interacted with. She had recognized the return address immediately. Bennett Holdings, her father's firm. Edward Bennett had built it over decades. Quietly, methodically. Not in the way James built things, with visibility and acceleration, but with layers, structures within structures. Assets positioned not for immediate return, but for stability across time. He had never involved Courtney directly in the operations, not formally, but he had made sure she understood the architecture, the principles, the reasoning behind decisions that appeared conservative until they weren't. He had once told her that control was not about ownership alone. It was about timing, about knowing when something became visible. The envelope upstairs contained that timing. Courtney did not go to retrieve it. Not yet. Instead, she turned off the kitchen lights and walked slowly toward the stairs, one hand brushing lightly against the wall as she moved. Not for support, but for orientation. A quiet acknowledgement of the space she still occupied. Upstairs, James's voice could be heard faintly through the study door. On a call. His tone measured, persuasive. The version of him that still functioned without hesitation in professional settings. Courtney passed the door without stopping. In the bedroom, the envelope remained where she had left it. Unopened. Undisturbed. She sat on the edge of the bed and placed one hand over her abdomen. 3 heartbeats, steady, unaffected by the shifts happening around them. Down the hall, James's voice sharpened slightly, then softened again. Negotiating, adjusting, maintaining control, Courtney lowered herself back against the pillows, her gaze fixed on the ceiling. She did not need to open the envelope to understand what it contained. She already knew. And more importantly, she knew when it would matter. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, though its presence had been anticipated long before it crossed the threshold of the Bennett townhouse. Courtney recognized the courier service immediately. Not because of the uniform, but because of the discretion. No branding that drew attention. No unnecessary conversation. Just a name confirmed, a signature taken, and a package handed over with the quiet efficiency of something that had already been decided elsewhere. She signed for it without hesitation. The weight of the envelope was slight. The consequence of it was not. It remained on the hallway table for several hours, positioned between a decorative bowl and a stack of unopened catalogs James had not asked about. Courtney passed it more than once throughout the day, never pausing long enough to suggest anticipation, but never ignoring it entirely. Timing, her father had always said, was not about delay. It was about alignment. Edward Bennett had never raised his voice to make a point. He had never needed to. His presence carried a kind of still authority, the result of decades spent making decisions that did not require explanation in the moment, but revealed themselves fully over time. He had built Bennett Holdings in layers, not through spectacle, not through sudden expansion, but through acquisition, consolidation, and restraint. While others pursued visibility, Edward had pursued permanence. He invested in assets that did not demand attention, but quietly dictated terms, commercial real estate, in cities that would expand, private equity in companies that would outlast market fluctuations, and long-term instruments structured to shift ownership without disruption. Courtney had not been formally introduced into the business, but she had been taught to observe it. As a child, she had sat in rooms where conversations were not meant to include her, and listened anyway. As a teenager, she had learned to read financial statements, not as static reports, but as narrative stories about risk control and intention. By the time she reached adulthood, she understood something that most people did not: ownership was rarely where it appeared to be. Her father had made sure of that. The call confirming his passing had come 3 weeks earlier. It had been early, still dark outside, the kind of hour when the world feels suspended between one day and the next. Courtney had answered on the second ring, already aware of what the call would contain. There had been no shock, no denial, just a quiet acknowledgement of something that had been approaching for some time. Edward Bennett had been ill, not publicly, not in a way that disrupted his operations, but enough that he had begun preparing for absence long before it arrived. The funeral had been private, a small gathering, close associates, a handful of individuals who understood the scope of what he had built, even if they never spoke about it directly. There were no speeches designed for public memory, no declarations, just presence. James had attended. He had stood beside Courtney, offered the appropriate gestures, maintained the expected composure. To him, Edward had been a distant figure, respected certainly, but not fully understood. That distance had not been accidental. Edward had never opposed the marriage, but he had not encouraged proximity either. He had met James with politeness, observed him with care, and maintained a boundary that was neither cold nor welcoming, simply defined. After the service, as people began to leave, one of Edward's attorneys had approached Courtney. "Miss Bennett," he had said quietly, "will be in touch regarding your father's estate." She had nodded. "I understand." James had been standing close enough to hear the exchange, but not close enough to interpret its weight. Later in the car, he had asked, "Is there anything complicated we need to deal with?" Courtney had looked out the window as the city moved past in slow, reflective surfaces. No, she had said. It's already been arranged. That had been true. Edward Bennett did not leave arrangements unfinished. Now, weeks later, the envelope sat within reach. Courtney finally picked it up in the early evening after the house had settled into its usual quiet. James was still at the office. His schedule had extended further into the night in recent months, the boundaries between work and absence becoming less distinct. She carried the envelope upstairs, not to the bedroom, but to the smaller sitting room at the end of the hallway. It was a space they rarely used. A place with 2 chairs, a narrow table, and a window that faced the street below. The light outside had begun to fade. Courtney sat, placed the envelope on the table, and opened it with deliberate care. Inside were several documents, not many, but enough. The first was a formal letter from Bennett Holdings confirming the execution of Edward Bennett's estate plan. The language was precise, structured, without excess. Courtney read it once, then again. There were no surprises, only confirmations. She was the sole beneficiary, not just of liquid assets, but of controlling interests in multiple entities held under layered trusts and subsidiary structures. The valuation, based on conservative estimates, exceeded $240 million. The number itself did not alter her expression. It never had. What mattered was not the figure, but the framework surrounding it. The second document outlined the terms of the trust. Irrevocable, protected, structured in such a way that the assets remained entirely separate from any marital claims. The prenuptial agreement she had signed years earlier at her father's insistence and James's reluctant acceptance was referenced explicitly. All protections were active. All transfers had been completed prior to Edward's passing. There was no window for dispute. The third document was shorter. A personal note, not handwritten but dictated. Transcribed in a way that preserved Edward's tone without attempting to replicate sentiment. Courtney read it slowly. Control is not what you hold. It is what remains when others believe they have taken something from you. You will know when to act, not before, not after. E.B. She folded the note and placed it back into the envelope. Outside, a car passed. Headlights moved briefly across the wall, then disappeared. Courtney remained seated. Downstairs, the front door opened. James's voice carried upward, indistinct at first, then clearer as he moved through the entryway. He was speaking to someone on the phone, his tone controlled, but edged with something less stable beneath the surface. Yes, I understand the delay, he was saying. But we had an agreement. A pause. No, that's not acceptable. Another pause. I'll handle it. The call ended. Courtney did not move. She placed the documents back into the envelope, sealed it, and set it aside on the table. Not hidden, not displayed, simply present, James's footsteps sounded on the stairs. Measured, slightly heavier than usual. He reached the hallway, paused briefly, then continued toward the bedroom. The study door opened, then closed. A moment later, the faint sound of a drawer sliding papers shifting, searching. Courtney remained in the sitting room, her gaze directed toward the window, though her attention was elsewhere. She did not need to listen to know what he was looking for. Numbers, assurances. Something that would confirm that the structure he believed he controlled was still intact. It was not, and it had not been for some time. The difference was that now the transition had been completed, legally, quietly, without disruption, exactly as Edward Bennett had intended. Courtney stood after a while, taking the envelope with her. She walked back into the hallway, past the closed study door, and into the bedroom. She placed the documents in the drawer beside the bed beneath a set of neatly folded scarves. Not concealed, but not immediately visible either. She closed the drawer, James did not emerge from the study that night. The light beneath the door remained on long past midnight. Courtney lay in bed, one hand resting lightly over her abdomen, feeling the steady movement beneath her skin. 3 heartbeats, uninterrupted, unaffected. In the study, James continued to work through numbers that no longer aligned with reality. He did not yet understand why. But he would, just not in the way he expected. The shift did not begin with Olivia Grant. It only became visible when she entered the room. By then, the pressure had already been building inside James Bennett's life in ways that resisted simple explanation. It lived in numbers that no longer reconciled, in calls that ended too quickly, and meetings that extended beyond their purpose. It lived in the quiet adjustments he made to his tone, his schedule, his expectations, small recalibrations that taken together formed a pattern he did not name. Olivia simply recognized it. She first appeared at a client dinner in early November, hosted in a private room overlooking the Charles River. The setting was designed for discretion. Dim lighting controlled acoustics, a view that suggested openness without offering exposure. The kind of environment where decisions could be made without appearing to be decisions. James had been invited as a consultant. Olivia had been invited as something else. She arrived 10 minutes after the scheduled start, not late enough to disrupt the rhythm of the evening, but late enough to be noticed. Her presence altered the room in subtle ways, not through volume or overt display, but through attention. Conversations shifted slightly. Pauses lengthened. Introductions became more deliberate. When she was introduced to James, she held his gaze a moment longer than necessary. James Bennett, the host, said. Olivia Grant. Her handshake was firm, her expression composed. I've heard about your firm, she said. The phrasing was neutral, neither praise nor dismissal. An opening. James nodded. I hope the right things. That depends on who's speaking, she replied. There was no smile attached to the line, only observation. Courtney was not present that evening. She had declined the invitation earlier that week, citing fatigue. The pregnancy had begun to shift her physical boundaries in ways that were difficult to predict. Some days passed with relative ease. Others required stillness. She had not framed it as sacrifice, only as adjustment. James had accepted her absence without comment. At the dinner, Olivia positioned herself strategically. Not at the center of the table, but not at the edge either. Close enough to engage, distant enough to observe. She listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, the room adjusted. She asked questions that moved conversations forward. Not about surface details, but about structure, about timelines, about underlying assumptions that others had taken for granted. James noticed, not immediately, but over the course of the evening, as patterns began to emerge. She did not interrupt him. She did not compete for attention. But she understood the same language he spoke, risk-leverage timing, and she used it with precision. By the end of the night, they had exchanged contact information. Not as a gesture of interest, as a continuation of something already in motion. The first meeting followed a week later, a coffee shop near James's office. Public but not crowded. The kind of place where conversation could remain contained without appearing concealed. They spoke for an hour. About markets. About recent shifts in capital flows. About the instability in sectors that had once seemed predictable. Olivia offered perspectives that aligned with James's concerns, but extended them further. She identified opportunities within constraints, risks that could be reframed as entry points. You're overextended, she said at one point, not as criticism but as fact. James leaned back slightly. That's one way to describe growth. It's one way to describe exposure, she replied. He did not disagree. That was the moment the dynamic shifted. Not toward intimacy, toward alignment. Over the next several weeks, their meetings became more frequent. sometimes planned, sometimes incidental. A shared presence at industry events. A conversation that continued beyond its original context. A message sent late in the evening, answered quickly. Courtney observed the change without needing to confirm it. James's schedule altered, not dramatically, but consistently. Later returns, earlier departures, calls taken in other rooms, a phone placed face down more often than before. There were no overt signs, nothing that demanded confrontation, only a pattern. Courtney did not ask questions. She adjusted her own movements within the house, creating space where space was already being taken, not as withdrawal, as recognition. One evening, James returned home later than usual. Courtney was in the living room seated with a notebook open on her lap. Not writing, just holding it. "You're still up," he said. "I couldn't sleep." He nodded, setting his keys down on the table without meeting her eyes. "I had dinner with a client," he added. Courtney closed the notebook. "Was it productive?" "Yes." A pause. "We're looking at a new opportunity." She inclined her head slightly. "Is it stable?" James hesitated just long enough to register. "It has potential." Courtney did not respond immediately. She had learned that potential in James's vocabulary often arrived before certainty, that it filled the space where caution should have been. "Be careful," she said finally. The words were not directive. They were observational. James exhaled a faint trace of irritation beneath the surface. "I know what I'm doing. I didn't say you didn't." The distinction lingered. He looked at her then as if trying to determine whether there was something beneath the exchange he had missed. But Courtney's expression remained unchanged. Calm, present, unavailable to interpretation. He turned away. Upstairs, his phone lit up briefly on the nightstand. A message from Olivia. "We should move quickly, before the window closes." James read it, then typed a response. Agreed. He did not consider the cost of speed, not in that moment. Downstairs, Courtney remained seated for a while longer after he had gone upstairs. The notebook rested in her lap, still unopened. She was not documenting what she saw. She was remembering it. Patterns did not need to be written down to be understood. They only needed time. And time, Courtney knew, had already begun to shift. Upstairs, James moved through plans that extended beyond his current reach. In another part of the city, Olivia prepared for outcomes she intended to control. And in the quiet space between them, something else continued to develop, unseen, unspoken, but already structured in a way that would not require confrontation to become undeniable. The clinic had been designed to feel reassuring. Soft lighting, neutral colors, framed prints that suggested calm without drawing attention. The waiting area held low conversations, the kind that stayed within personal boundaries. Nothing in the space acknowledged urgency, even when urgency existed. Courtney Bennett sat with both hands resting over the curve of her abdomen, her posture steady, her breathing even. Across from her, a wall-mounted screen displayed silent footage of a coastal landscape, waves moving in repetition, uninterrupted by consequence. James Bennett stood near the window. Not close enough to her to suggest partnership. Not far enough to appear detached, positioned. His phone remained in his hand, though he was not actively using it. The habit had become part of him, a point of contact with a world that demanded response. Or perhaps a world he preferred to remain accountable to. "Dr. Harris will see you now," the nurse said. Courtney rose first. James followed, slipping his phone into his pocket with a motion that appeared automatic but carried intention. He had already decided how the next several minutes would unfold. Inside the examination room, the light was brighter, clinical, exact. Dr. Melissa Harris greeted them with professional warmth, her attention focused first on Courtney. "How are you feeling today?" Steady Courtney replied. Dr. Harris nodded, making a note on the tablet in her hand. Any changes since your last visit? Discomfort, fatigue, beyond the usual, nothing unexpected? The answer was precise. Not dismissive, not expansive. James remained standing near the door. He did not sit. Dr. Harris glanced toward him, briefly acknowledging his presence, then returned her attention to Courtney. "We'll do a quick check today," she said. "Vitals, then imaging. With multiples, we want to monitor closely, but everything has been consistent so far." Courtney inclined her head. "Thank you." The nurse adjusted the equipment while Dr. Harris reviewed the previous readings. The room filled with small, functional sounds, the movement of instruments, the soft tap of fingers against a screen. James stepped forward then. "Doctor," he said. The word interrupted the rhythm of the room without raising his voice. Dr. Harris looked up. "Yes, I won't need to stay for the full appointment." The phrasing was measured, not abrupt, not apologetic. Dr. Harris paused, assessing the statement before responding. "Of course," she said. "We'll update you after if needed." James nodded. "That won't be necessary." Courtney did not turn toward him. Her gaze remained directed toward the far wall where the reflection of light shifted slightly across the surface. There was a moment, a brief one, where the room could have returned to its prior function, routine, expected. But James did not allow it. He reached into his briefcase and removed a folder. Not large, not conspicuous, but deliberate. He placed it on the examination table beside Courtney, aligning it carefully with the edge. "I've already spoken with my attorney," he said. The nurse's hand stilled for a fraction of a second before resuming her task. Dr. Harris remained composed, though her attention had shifted entirely. Courtney lowered her eyes to the folder. She did not open it. James continued. "This isn't working," he said. "Not long term." The words were calm, structured, as if they had been rehearsed to remove any element of emotion that might complicate their delivery. Courtney's hand moved slightly, resting more firmly over her abdomen. The movement was small, protective, but not defensive. Dr. Harris spoke then, her tone carefully neutral. "Mr. Bennett, this may not be the appropriate." "It's fine," Courtney said. The interruption was quiet, controlled. Dr. Harris paused. Courtney looked at the folder again, then at James. Not searching for explanation, not requesting clarification, just acknowledging his presence within the moment he had created. "You want me to sign?" she said. It was not a question. James exhaled, as if relieved that the conversation would not require expansion. "Yes." Another pause. "I can't continue like this," he added. "The timing, the responsibility, it's not sustainable." Courtney did not respond immediately. The nurse stepped back, creating space that had not been requested, but was necessary. Dr. Harris remained where she was, her posture attentive, her silence deliberate. "What part isn't sustainable?" Courtney asked. The question was simple, direct. It did not accuse, it did not soften. It required definition. James's jaw tightened slightly. "This," he said, gesturing not toward her specifically, but toward the situation as a whole. "The pregnancy, the complications, the financial strain. It's all connected." Courtney followed the motion of his hand without reacting to it. "You think this is the cause," she said. "I think it's part of the problem." The distinction mattered to him. It allowed him to frame the decision as rational, measured, necessary. Courtney reached for the folder. She opened it with slow precision, her fingers moving along the edge of the paper before lifting the first page. The language was standard, legal, constructed to separate without assigning explicit blame. She read the first paragraph, then the second. James watched her, his expression controlled, though there was a subtle tension beneath it. Not uncertainty, not doubt, expectation. Courtney turned the page. There were no visible changes in her expression, no shift in posture, only movement. Dr. Harris spoke again more firmly this time. "Mrs. Bennett, you do not have to address this now." "We can, it's fine," Courtney repeated. The words held the same tone as before. Not dismissive, not resigned. Definitive. She reached for the pen James had placed beside the folder. Another deliberate action, another element he had prepared in advance. Courtney held the pen for a moment before lowering it to the paper. Her hand did not tremble. The line she drew was steady, complete. She signed her name without hesitation. James exhaled again, not audibly, but visibly. A release, as if something that had been pending had finally resolved. He reached for the folder, closing it quickly, efficiently. "I'll have the rest processed," he said. Courtney placed the pen back on the table. Her hand returned to its previous position over her abdomen. She did not look at him again. James hesitated for a moment, just long enough to suggest that something unsaid remained. Then he adjusted his jacket. "I'll arrange the logistics," he added. "The house accounts will separate everything cleanly." Courtney nodded once. A minimal acknowledgement, nothing more. James turned toward the door. Dr. Harris stepped slightly to the side, allowing him to pass without obstruction. He paused at the threshold, his hand resting briefly against the frame, not looking back. Then he left. The door closed behind him with a soft, controlled click. The room remained still. The nurse looked toward Dr. Harris, then back at Courtney, uncertain whether to resume the appointment or wait for instruction. Dr. Harris stepped forward. "Courtney," she said gently, "we can take a moment." Courtney shook her head slightly. "No," she said, "let's continue." The response was immediate, clear. Dr. Harris studied her for a brief second, then nodded. "All right," she said, "we'll proceed." The examination resumed. Measurements, readings, the steady rhythm of a process that existed independent of personal disruption. Courtney followed each instruction without hesitation. When the imaging began, the room filled with the soft, rhythmic sound of 3 separate heartbeats, distinct, synchronized, uninterrupted. Courtney closed her eyes for a moment. Not in distress, in acknowledgement. Dr. Harris watched the monitor, her expression focused. "Everything looks stable," she said quietly. Courtney opened her eyes. "Thank you." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Outside the room, James moved through the hallway without stopping. The folder remained in his hand, its contents now finalized in the way he had intended. He did not look back. He did not consider the timing. He did not recognize that the separation he had just formalized had already been structured long before this moment. Inside the examination room, the sound of 3 heartbeats continued, steady, unaffected, already aligned with a future that no longer required his presence to unfold. The house did not change immediately after James left. That was the first thing Courtney noticed. The furniture remained where it had always been. The light fell across the same surfaces at the same angles. The hallway still held the faint echo of footsteps that had moved through it for years. Nothing announced the shift. Nothing acknowledged it. But the absence had weight. Not loud, not disruptive, defined. Courtney stood in the entryway the evening after the clinic appointment, her hand resting lightly against the edge of the console table where she had once placed unopened mail. The space felt larger, though nothing had expanded. The quiet carried differently, as if it no longer needed to accommodate another presence. James had returned briefly that afternoon. Not to speak, to collect. He moved through the house with purpose, his actions efficient, contained. A suitcase placed on the bed, a selection of clothes removed from the closet. Documents gathered from the study. He did not open drawers he did not need. He did not linger in rooms that held memory. Courtney remained upstairs during most of it, not avoiding him, allowing the process to complete without interruption. There had been a moment near the end when they occupied the same space. James stood near the bedroom door, his jacket already on his phone in his hand. "I'll have someone contact you about the formalities," he said. Courtney was seated in the chair by the window. "Okay," he nodded. "I'll transfer what's necessary. The joint account basic expenses for now." Courtney looked at him then. "That won't be necessary." The response was calm, not resistant, definitive. James paused. "It's temporary," he said, "until everything is finalized." Courtney held his gaze. "I understand," she said. "It still won't be necessary." There was a brief silence, not tense, but unresolved. James exhaled as if choosing not to pursue the point further. "Fine," he said. He adjusted the strap of his bag, glanced once around the room, not in reflection, but in confirmation, and turned toward the door. "Take care of yourself," he added. The words were offered without emphasis. A closing line. Courtney inclined her head slightly. "You too," he left after that. The door closed with the same controlled finality it had at the clinic. Now, in the quiet that followed, Courtney moved through the house with measured intention, not to reclaim it, to understand it differently. She walked into the study first. James had cleared most of his documents, but not all. A few folders remained stacked neatly on the desk, not forgotten, deferred, items that had lost immediate relevance in the urgency of his departure. Courtney did not open them. She did not need to. Instead, she noted their presence, their placement, the categories implied by their labels. Patterns. Always patterns. She moved next to the kitchen. The dishes from the previous night had already been washed. The counters were clean. The space held no visible trace of disruption. But the rhythm had changed. There was no second glass placed beside hers. No movement in the background. No interruption of thought. She poured herself water and drank it slowly, her hand steady against the glass. Then she turned off the light and walked upstairs. The bedroom remained as James had left it. One side of the closet partially empty, the dresser slightly misaligned from where it had been moved during packing. The bed undisturbed. Courtney walked to the drawer beside it and opened it. The envelope from Bennett Holdings remained where she had placed it. She removed it, carried it to the bed, and sat. This time, she did not hesitate. She took out the documents again, reviewing them with the same precision as before, but now with context aligned to action. The trust structure, the asset allocations, the timing of transfers. Everything had been executed prior to the clinic appointment, prior to the signature on the divorce papers. There was no overlap, no ambiguity. Legally, the separation James had initiated had no claim on what had already been secured. Courtney placed the documents back into the envelope. Then she reached for her phone. There was a number saved under a single name, Daniel Brooks. She pressed it. The line connected after 2 rings. Miss Bennett Daniel said, his voice composed, prepared. "I was expecting your call." Courtney leaned back slightly against the headboard. "I've reviewed the documents," she said, "and they're clear." Daniel paused briefly. "Yes," he said. "They were designed to be." Courtney closed her eyes for a moment, not from fatigue, but from focus. "I want to proceed," she said. With which aspect? All of it. There was no urgency in her tone, no escalation, just direction. Daniel understood. "We'll begin with verification of asset control," he said. "Then we'll address any residual connections, accounts, properties, liabilities tied to Mr. Bennett's name." Courtney opened her eyes. Make sure everything is documented. It will be. And Daniel, she added. Yes, no notifications yet. A brief silence followed. Understood, he said. You want to wait? Yes. For a specific reason, Courtney's gaze shifted toward the window. Outside, the streetlights had begun to glow, casting steady lines of illumination across the pavement. For alignment, she said. Daniel did not ask for clarification. He did not need to. I'll prepare everything, he replied. When you're ready, we'll move. Courtney ended the call. She placed the phone beside her and remained seated for a while longer, her hand resting once again over her abdomen. 3 heartbeats, consistent, unchanged. Downstairs, the house remained still, not empty, reconfigured. Across the city, James entered a different space. An apartment not yet fully furnished, temporary in design, but immediate in function. Olivia stood near the window, her posture relaxed, her expression attentive as he placed his bag down. It's done, she asked. James nodded. Yes. She studied him for a moment, assessing not just the answer, but the state behind it. And the rest, she said. It'll follow. Olivia turned slightly, her gaze returning to the city beyond the glass. Good, she said. Then we can move forward. James stepped beside her, looking out at the same view. Lights, movement, opportunity. He did not look back. He did not consider the structure he had just exited. He did not recognize that the foundation he believed he had left behind no longer existed in the form he understood. Back in the townhouse, Courtney laid down the envelope, returned to its place, the plan already in motion. Not visible, not announced, but aligned, exactly as it needed to be. Daniel Brooks did not begin with conclusions. He began with structure. 2 days after Courtney's call, a courier delivered a secured portfolio to the townhouse. Black leather sealed, accompanied by a brief note requesting her review prior to their scheduled meeting. The delivery required identification, a signature, and confirmation. Not because the contents were fragile, but because they were definitive. Courtney placed the portfolio on the dining table where James had once sorted his own documents. The symmetry was not intentional, but it was exact. She did not open it immediately. Instead, she moved through the house, first adjusting small things that had shifted out of alignment. A chair returned to its place, a stack of mail reorganized, curtains drawn slightly to control the light. The actions were quiet, almost invisible, but they carried purpose. Not restoration, not denial, preparation. When she returned to the table, she sat open the portfolio and began. The first section was labeled Trust Structure Overview. Clear, direct. Inside were diagrams, layered, precise representations of entities connected through lines that indicated ownership, control, and transfer mechanisms. Names appeared in controlled repetition. Bennett Holdings Subsidiary, LLCs. Investment vehicles structured across jurisdictions, designed for stability rather than visibility. Courtney studied the diagrams slowly, not to understand them, to confirm them. Each line reflected decisions her father had made years earlier, moves placed in anticipation of moments that had not yet existed at the time they were executed. Edward Bennett had never relied on reaction. He had built for inevitability. The second section detailed asset allocation, commercial properties in Boston, Chicago, and San Francisco, minority stakes in private firms with projected growth curves that had already begun to materialize. Liquid accounts held in trust, accessible only under specific conditions now met. The total valuation, updated and verified, remained consistent with the initial estimate, $240 million. Courtney turned the page without pause. Numbers in themselves did not alter her pace. What mattered was how they moved. The third section addressed legal protections. Here, Daniel's precision became unmistakable. The prenuptial agreement signed years earlier in a quiet office with minimal ceremony was outlined in full. Not in summary, but in detail. Every clause, every condition, every limitation. Courtney remembered the day she had signed it. James had been present, though visibly uncomfortable. Not resistant, but uncertain. He had asked questions at the time about fairness, about necessity. Edward had answered them without emphasis, explaining that such agreements were not about distrust. They were about clarity. Clarity had now become decisive. The document confirmed that all assets held under the Bennett trust structure were entirely separate from marital claims, not partially, not conditionally, completely. Even in the event of dispute, even under review, the protections held. Courtney closed the section and moved to the final portion. Action plan. Daniel had outlined it in stages. Verification of ownership across all entities. Confirmation of account access. Identification of any residual financial ties to James Bennett's name. Joint accounts, shared liabilities, business connections that had once intersected but now required separation. Each step was accompanied by documentation requirements. Evidence, records, nothing assumed, everything recorded. Courtney read through the plan once, then again. Her attention did not linger on any single point. It moved fluidly, connecting elements, recognizing sequences. When she finished, she closed the portfolio and sat for a moment in stillness. The house remained quiet. Outside, the afternoon had shifted toward evening, the light lowering gradually across the street. Courtney reached for her phone. "Daniel," she said when the line connected. "I trust you've received the portfolio," he replied. "Yes, and it aligns." A brief pause. "Good," he said. "We can begin immediately." Courtney looked at the portfolio again, her hand resting lightly on its surface. "Start with verification," she said. "All entities. No assumptions. Understood." "And the accounts," she added. "I want full visibility. Current balances, transaction histories. Anything that connects to James." Daniel did not hesitate. "We'll pull everything," he said. "It may take 48 hours for complete records, but initial reports will come sooner." Courtney nodded, though he could not see it. "Proceed." She ended the call and placed the phone beside her. The process had begun, not dramatically, not publicly, but with precision. Across the city, James Bennett sat at a glass conference table, his attention fixed on a series of documents spread before him. Olivia Grant sat across from him, her posture relaxed, but attentive, her focus sharp. "These projections don't hold if the capital isn't secured," she said. James leaned back slightly. "It will be." Based on what she asked. Existing lines, previous approvals. Olivia tilted her head. "Previous approvals don't guarantee current access," so James's jaw tightened. "I've worked with these institutions for years." "And they've worked with your numbers," she replied. "Not your history." The distinction was subtle. But it landed. James looked down at the documents again. There had been delays, minor at first. A response that took longer than expected. A request for additional verification. A line of credit that required reevaluation. He had attributed it to timing, market fluctuations, nothing structural. "We move forward," he said. "We don't hesitate." Olivia watched him for a moment. Then she nodded. "Then we move quickly," she said. "Before anything shifts." James agreed, not because he had confirmed stability, but because speed felt like control. Back at the townhouse, Courtney moved through the next phase without altering her pace. Emails began to arrive that evening, secure, encrypted, each one containing confirmations. Account access established. Ownership verified. Entities aligned exactly as outlined. There were no discrepancies. No unexpected variables. Everything had been transferred, documented, and secured prior to James's departure. Courtney reviewed each message carefully, not scanning, reading. She noted timestamps, authorization signatures, points of execution. Every detail reinforced the same reality. The separation James believed he had initiated at the clinic had in fact been preceded by a more comprehensive restructuring, one he had not seen, not anticipated, and could not now reverse. Courtney closed her laptop and placed it on the table. She did not react. There was nothing to react to, only confirmation. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the street below. The city moved as it always did. Cars passing, people walking, lights shifting in predictable patterns. Nothing in the external world reflected the changes that had already taken place. But that was the nature of structure. It did not announce itself. It revealed itself when needed. Courtney rested her hand once more over her abdomen. 3 heartbeats, steady, aligned. The process would continue, not with urgency, not with delay, but with timing that had already been set in motion long before James Bennett believed he had made a decision. James Bennett preferred momentum to clarity. It had always been that way, though it had not always carried consequences. In the earlier stages of his career, momentum had been an advantage. It allowed him to move faster than hesitation to secure opportunities before others fully evaluated them, to build a reputation around decisiveness rather than caution. But momentum required foundation. And foundation, when misread, became exposure. The office space he had recently leased with Olivia Grant reflected his current approach. Glass walls, open layouts, minimal separation between teams. The design suggested transparency, but it also revealed everything. Movement, activity, absence. There was no room for quiet correction. At the center of the space, a long table held the current iteration of their expansion plan, documents layered, annotated, adjusted across multiple sessions that had extended late into the night. Olivia stood at one end, reviewing a set of revised projections. James remained seated, his attention divided between the numbers in front of him and the notifications appearing intermittently on his phone. "Walk me through the capital structure again," Olivia said without looking up. James leaned forward slightly. "We leverage the existing lines first," he said. "Bridge the gap with short-term financing, then transition into long-term once the initial returns stabilize." Olivia nodded once. "And the existing lines," she said. "They're confirmed." James paused. "Pending final approval," he said. Olivia looked up then. "Pending or confirmed pending," he repeated, this time with less certainty. She closed the folder in front of her. "That's not the same thing." "I know," James said, his tone controlled. "But it's standard. They always review before extending." Olivia studied him for a moment. "Review isn't the issue," she said. "Outcome is." James exhaled, leaning back. "They've worked with me for years," he said again, as if repetition could reinforce stability. "They know the structure." "They knew the previous structure," Olivia replied. "We're asking them to extend into a new one." The distinction settled into the space between them. James did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached for his phone, scrolling briefly through recent messages. There were responses from 2 institutions he had contacted earlier that morning. Neither was definitive. One requested updated documentation. The other suggested a follow-up call later in the week. Neither confirmed access. "We don't slow down," James said finally. "We push forward." Olivia did not challenge the statement. She adjusted her position slightly, her focus returning to the documents. "Then we need to secure interim funding," she said. "Private, faster, less scrutiny." James nodded. "I have contacts." "Use them," she said. The calls began that afternoon. James moved from one conversation to the next, his tone shifting slightly depending on the audience. With some, he emphasized opportunity. With others, urgency. He referenced past successes, existing relationships, projections that remained valid under certain assumptions. He did not mention the delays. He did not mention the conditions. He presented continuity. But continuity required confirmation. And confirmation did not come. By early evening, the pattern had become more difficult to ignore. Requests for updated financials, questions about current asset positions, inquiries that extended beyond standard due diligence into areas that suggested uncertainty. James ended one call and immediately placed another. Across the room, Olivia watched without interrupting. She did not need to. The shift was visible, not in the words he used, in the pauses between them. That night in the apartment, the conversation resumed. The space was still new, temporary in its arrangement, though not in its intention. Boxes remained partially unpacked. Furniture had been selected, quickly chosen for function rather than permanence. Olivia stood near the kitchen counter, a glass of water in her hand. "How many confirmed?" she asked. James set his phone down on the table. "None finalized yet," he said. Olivia did not react immediately. "And the ones from this morning reviewing?" She nodded slowly. "And the private contacts following up?" Olivia took a sip of water, her gaze steady. "We're moving into a window where hesitation becomes visible," she said. James looked at her. "I'm not hesitating." "I know," she replied, "but they are." The difference mattered. So James stood, walking to the window. The city stretched out below its lights, consistent, its movement uninterrupted. From this distance, everything appeared stable, contained. He rested his hand against the glass. "They'll come through," he said. Olivia did not contradict him, but she did not affirm it either. "We adjust if they don't," she said. James turned slightly. How scale back, restructure, or secure capital elsewhere? Elsewhere where Olivia met his gaze. Anywhere that doesn't require the same level of transparency. James considered that. Not rejecting it. Not fully accepting it. Just holding it as a possibility. Across the city, Courtney Bennett reviewed a different set of documents. The confirmations Daniel had initiated were continuing to arrive, each one reinforcing the same structure. Ownership verified, accounts secured, transfers complete. But now, an additional layer had been added. Transaction histories, detailed, comprehensive. Courtney sat at the dining table, her laptop open, her attention fixed on a series of entries that extended back several months. James's accounts, joint accounts that had once connected them, business-related transactions that had flowed through structures she now controlled. She did not scroll quickly. She moved line by line. Amounts, dates, destinations, patterns. There were investments she recognized. Others she did not. Transfers that aligned with the timeline Daniel had outlined. And some that extended beyond it. Courtney noted them, not with reaction, with precision. She opened a new document and began to list them. Not as accusations, as records, each entry placed in sequence, each connection identified. She did not draw conclusions. She did not need to. The structure would speak when it was time. Her phone vibrated softly beside her. A message from Daniel. "Preliminary review complete. No discrepancies. Full report tomorrow." Courtney read it once, then set the phone aside. No discrepancies. The phrase held weight. It meant the system had functioned exactly as designed. No gaps, no vulnerabilities, no openings. She closed the laptop and sat back, her hand resting once again over her abdomen. 3 heartbeats, consistent. Unaffected by the movement of numbers, the shifting of accounts, the instability that was beginning to take shape elsewhere. In the apartment, James stood at the window, considering options that required speed. In the townhouse, Courtney remained seated, aligned with a process that required timing. Between them, the distance was no longer measured in space. It was measured in structure. And structure, once established, did not adjust to momentum. It revealed its limits, gradually, then all at once. The first indication did not arrive as a warning. It arrived as a delay. James Bennett noticed it in the way his call was redirected. Not declined, not ignored, redirected. The difference was subtle, but it carried implication. It suggested that someone had made a decision not to engage immediately, but not to refuse entirely. He accepted the redirection without comment. "Mr. Bennett, we'll need to review your current documentation before proceeding," the voice on the other end said. James leaned back in his chair, his posture controlled. "You already have my documentation," he replied. "We have your previous filings," the voice clarified. "We'll need updated statements reflecting your current positions." James's fingers tightened slightly around the phone. "My positions haven't changed." A pause. "Then the review should be straightforward," the voice said. The call ended with a polite closing. No resolution, no confirmation, just process. James placed the phone down slowly, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. Across from him, Olivia Grant remained still, her attention focused not on the call itself, but on the reaction that followed it. "They're stalling," James said. "They're verifying," Olivia replied. "It's the same thing." "No," she said. "Stalling is hesitation, verification is doubt." The distinction settled into the room. James did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached for a folder, flipping it open to a set of financial summaries he had reviewed multiple times over the past week. The numbers had not changed, but the context around them had begun to shift. Lines that once represented accessible capital now required confirmation. Assets that had previously supported his position now appeared less immediate. He turned a page. "Send them the updates," Olivia said. "I will." And then James closed the folder. "They approve." Olivia watched him for a moment. "And if they don't," James stood, "they will." The second indication arrived that afternoon. An automated notification, brief, precise. Account activity temporarily restricted pending review. James read it twice. Then a third time. He opened the banking application, navigating through the interface with controlled speed. The account remained visible, the balance unchanged. But certain functions had been limited. Transfers, withdrawals beyond a set threshold, access. He exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "It's a review," he said aloud, though no one had asked. Olivia, seated nearby, looked up. "What kind of review?" Standard James replied. "Triggered by volume." Olivia stood walking toward him. "Triggered by inconsistency," she said. James turned the phone slightly, showing her the screen. "It's temporary." Olivia read the message, her expression unreadable. "For now," she said. By evening, the pattern had extended. Another message, another account, different institution, similar language. Additional verification required. James moved through the apartment with measured pacing, his phone in hand, his attention divided between incoming notifications and outgoing calls. "Your request is under review. We'll need updated documentation. Please allow 48 to 72 hours. Each response was controlled, professional, non-committal. James ended another call, placing the phone down with more force than intended. "They're coordinating," he said. Olivia leaned against the counter. "Or they're responding to the same information." James looked at her. "What information?" She held his gaze. "That's the question." Across the city, Courtney Bennett sat at her dining table, reviewing the full report Daniel Brooks had delivered earlier that afternoon. It was comprehensive, detailed, structured in a way that allowed for both overview and depth. Every account connected to James's financial activity had been mapped, every transaction categorized, every asset traced to its current status. Courtney moved through the document without interruption. Her pace did not change. Her expression did not shift. She noted the same entries she had identified the night before now, placed within a broader context. Patterns clarified, connections established. What had appeared as isolated decisions now formed a sequence. Investments made with increasing frequency, transfers executed with decreasing intervals. A shift from structured planning to reactive movement. Courtney closed the report and opened a separate file. Her own, the one she had begun compiling. She cross-referenced the entries, line by line, date by date. There were no contradictions, only confirmations. Her phone vibrated. "Daniel." "Courtney," he said when she answered. "You've seen the report." "Yes, and it aligns." A brief pause. "There are some irregularities," Daniel added. "Not in ownership, in behavior." Courtney leaned back slightly. "I've seen them. Do you want to proceed with formal action?" The question was precise, defined. Courtney considered it for a moment. Not the outcome, the timing. "Not yet," she said. Daniel did not respond immediately. "Understood," he said. "We can continue documenting." "Yes." "And the accounts," Courtney looked at the screen in front of her, where the structures remained clear, stable, unaffected. "Maintain position," she said. "No changes, no intervention." "Not yet." Daniel paused again. "You're waiting for something." Courtney's gaze shifted slightly, not away from the screen, but beyond it. "For alignment," she said. Daniel exhaled softly. "Then we wait." In the apartment, James stood near the window once more. The city remained unchanged. Lights, movement, continuity. But the stability he had once associated with it now felt conditional. His phone buzzed again. Another notification, another request, another delay. He opened the message, scanning it quickly. "We are unable to proceed at this time pending full verification of asset positions." James lowered the phone slowly. Olivia stepped closer. "What is it?" He handed her the screen. She read it without comment. Then she looked up. "This isn't isolated," she said. James nodded once. "I know. And your assets. They're there. But are they accessible?" James did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned back toward the window. The reflection in the glass showed a version of himself that remained composed, controlled. But the structure behind that reflection had begun to shift. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. "Give it time," he said. Olivia watched him. "Time isn't neutral," she replied. "It reveals." James did not respond. He continued to look out at the city as if the answer might appear in the distance. Back at the townhouse, Courtney closed her laptop and stood. The report remained on the table, organized, complete. She walked to the window, resting her hand lightly against the glass. The same city, the same lights, the same movement, but from her position the structure beneath it was clear, defined, unchanged. She placed one hand over her abdomen. 3 heartbeats, steady, consistent, unaffected. The process was continuing. Not because she had forced it, but because it had been built to. And as James Bennett began to encounter the first visible limits of what he believed he controlled, Courtney remained aligned with what had already been secured. The difference would not need to be explained. It would become evident, step by step, until there was nothing left to question. The email arrived at 8:12 a.m. It was not marked urgent. It did not carry a subject line designed to provoke immediate reaction. It appeared like any other communication James Bennett had received over the past week, structured, professional, measured in tone. But this one did not request information. It provided it. James opened it while standing in the kitchen of the apartment, his phone in one hand, a cup of coffee untouched on the counter. Olivia stood across from him, reviewing a set of notes from the previous night's projections. The room held the quiet of early morning, a brief suspension before movement began. James read the first paragraph once, then again. His expression did not change, but his posture did. "What is it?" Olivia asked without looking up. James did not answer immediately. He scrolled. The email was from one of the primary institutions he had worked with for years. The language was precise, controlled, final. "Following our internal review, we have updated our records to reflect current asset ownership structures. As a result, certain accounts previously associated with your portfolio are no longer recognized under your authorization." James set the phone down slowly. Olivia looked up. "James." He pushed the phone toward her. She read it in silence. Then she continued. The second paragraph clarified further. "We recommend directing any future inquiries regarding these assets to the current controlling party as listed in the attached documentation." Olivia opened the attachment. A series of documents appeared: ownership records, authorization, forms, timestamps confirming transfers that had been executed weeks earlier. Before the clinic, before the divorce, before the moment James had believed marked a shift in his position. He read over her shoulder. Each page confirmed the same reality. Assets he had referenced, accounts he had relied upon, structures he had assumed remained accessible, all reassigned, all documented, all complete. "This is wrong," James said. The words came evenly, not raised, but absolute. Olivia did not respond immediately. She continued reading. "It's consistent," she said finally. "With what?" "With the delays," she replied. "The verifications, the restrictions." James stepped back, his hand moving to the edge of the counter as if to steady something that had not yet visibly shifted. "They can't just remove authorization," he said. "They can if it was never yours to begin with." James turned toward her. "It was." Olivia met his gaze. "Then why does the documentation say otherwise?" The question did not challenge. It defined. James reached for his phone again, scrolling through the attachment with controlled urgency. Dates, signatures, legal confirmations, every element aligned. Not recently, not in response to his actions. Prior, structured, completed. "This doesn't make sense," he said. Olivia closed the document. "It does," she said. "We just didn't see it." James looked at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the structure you were operating within changed before you realized it," she replied. "And everything you've been trying to access since then wasn't there." The words settled into the room with a weight that did not require emphasis. James turned away, pacing once across the length of the kitchen. "This is a mistake," he said again. But the repetition carried less certainty. Olivia watched him. "Then confirm it," she said. James stopped. He picked up his phone and dialed. The call connected after a brief pause. "This is James Bennett," he said. "I need to speak with someone regarding the recent changes to my account authorization." A pause. "Yes, I've reviewed the documentation. I need clarification." Another pause. He listened. His expression remained controlled, but the tension beneath it sharpened. "I don't understand," he said. "Those assets have been part of my portfolio for years." A longer pause. His grip on the phone tightened slightly. "No," he said. "There must be an error. I need—" He stopped, listened. "Then I see." The words were quiet, measured, He ended the call. Olivia did not move. What did they say, she asked. James placed the phone down. They confirmed it, he said. And the ownership changed weeks ago. Olivia nodded once. Before the divorce. James did not respond. He looked at the documents again as if repetition might alter their meaning. It did not. Who, he said finally. Olivia already knew the answer, but she let him reach it. James scrolled to the final page of the attachment. There, in precise legal language, the controlling party was listed. Courtney Bennett. He stared at the name, not in disbelief, in recognition. The connection formed. Not gradually, immediately. The trust, the structure, the timing, everything aligned in a way he had not considered. She knew, he said. Olivia did not correct him. She didn't need to know, she replied. She needed to be in position. James exhaled slowly. The room remained still, but the structure within it had shifted completely. Everything he had built his recent decisions on assumptions of access control continuity no longer held. Not because they had been taken, because they had never been his to secure. Across the city, Courtney Bennett received a different email. Short, direct. From Daniel. Initial notifications delivered, responses expected within the day. Courtney read it once, then closed her laptop. She stood moving to the window, as she had done each morning since the process began. The city moved without interruption. Cars passing, people walking, the same patterns. But beneath them, the structures had shifted. Quietly, completely. Her phone vibrated. Another message. Daniel, you may begin receiving direct contact. Courtney placed the phone down. She did not reach for it again, not immediately. Instead, she rested her hand over her abdomen. 3 heartbeats. Steady, unchanged. The timing had aligned. Not because she had forced it, because she had waited. In the apartment, James stood in silence. Olivia remained near the counter, her attention fixed not on the documents now, but on him. What do we do, she asked. James did not answer right away. He looked at the city again, but this time the view did not offer distance. It reflected, not opportunity, not expansion, limits. We adjust, he said finally. Olivia studied him. How? James turned back toward the table where the documents remained. We find another way. Olivia did not challenge the statement, but she did not affirm it either. Because for the first time since she had entered his orbit, the structure beneath James Bennett's confidence was no longer supported by access. It was supported by reaction. And reaction, unlike structure, did not hold. Not for long. Michael Turner's office did not rely on appearance. It relied on precision. Located on the 23rd floor of a building that favored function over display, the space reflected the same approach Michael applied to his work-controlled methodical and absent of unnecessary detail. There were no decorative statements, no framed accolades positioned to impress. Only files ordered. Surfaces clear. Time accounted for. James Bennett arrived 10 minutes early, not out of habit, out of necessity. He sat across from Michael Turner, the documents from the previous morning arranged in a careful stack on the desk between them. Olivia had not accompanied him. The decision had not been discussed, but it had been understood. This was not a conversation that benefited from additional presence. Michael adjusted his glasses slightly, reviewing the first set of papers without speaking. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was evaluative. James remained still, his posture composed, though the tension beneath it had not receded since the email had arrived. Finally, Michael set the documents down. "These are valid," he said. James did not react immediately. "I need you to look again," he replied. Michael held his gaze. "I did." A pause. There must be a way to challenge this, James said. The timing, the transfers, there's something here. Michael leaned back slightly in his chair. There is, he said. There's a structure that was put in place before any of your recent actions. James's jaw tightened. I was part of that structure. Michael shook his head once. You were adjacent to it, he said, not embedded within it. The distinction settled heavily. James looked at the documents again as if proximity might change their meaning. They were in my accounts, he said. They were accessible to you, Michael corrected. That's not the same as ownership. James exhaled slowly. The prenuptial agreement, he said. There has to be something in there, something that allows for reconsideration under these circumstances. Michael reached for another document, sliding it forward. You signed this, he said, voluntarily, with representation. It's clear, comprehensive, and it specifically addresses scenarios like this. James scanned the page. He remembered the day, the conversation, the way he had dismissed its importance in the context of what he believed they were building together. It doesn't account for this, he said. It does, Michael replied. It accounts for separation of assets regardless of timing, especially if those assets were structured independently of the marriage. James's hand moved slightly against the edge of the desk. What about the transfer timing, he asked. Weeks before the divorce. That's intentional. Michael did not disagree. Yes, he said. It is. And that doesn't raise concerns. It raises questions, Michael said, but not legal challenges. The transfers were executed within the framework of the trust. They were authorized, documented, and completed before any formal separation. James leaned forward. So there's nothing we can do? Michael paused. Not in the way you're asking, he said. James looked at him. What does that mean? It means you can review the process, Michael replied. You can verify that every step was executed correctly, but unless you find a procedural error, and I'm not seeing one, you don't have grounds to reverse it. The words were delivered without emphasis. They did not need it. James sat back. The room remained still, controlled. But the structure of the conversation had shifted. What about my current position, he asked. Michael folded his hands. Your current position is separate from this, he said, but it's affected by it. James exhaled again. My accounts are being restricted. I'm aware. They're asking for verification on assets I no longer have access to. Michael nodded. That's consistent. With what? With a change in your financial profile. James looked at him. They're treating me like I don't have collateral. Michael did not respond immediately. Then they're treating you based on current data. The distinction was precise. James stood, not abruptly, but with a finality that suggested the conversation had reached its limit. There has to be another approach, he said. Michael remained seated. There is, he said. You adjust. James turned slightly. How you restructure your obligations, Michael replied. Reduce exposure, stabilize what remains. James's expression tightened. That's not an option. It may not be a preference, Michael said, but it is an option. James did not respond. He gathered the documents, aligning them with the same care he had brought into the room. Controlled, ordered, as if structure could be maintained through arrangement. Michael watched him. If you want to proceed further, he added, we can continue reviewing. But you should be aware this isn't a matter of argument. It's a matter of position. And your position has changed. James paused at the door. For a moment, it seemed as if he might say something more. Then he left. Outside, the city moved, as it always did. Uninterrupted. James stepped onto the sidewalk, the document still in his hand, his attention fixed not on the people around him, but on the sequence of events that had brought him to this point, the clinic, the signature. the assumption of control. Each step had felt decisive, intentional. But now viewed in reverse, they aligned differently, not as actions that created separation, as moments that followed it. He reached the car, opened the door, and paused briefly before getting in. His phone vibrated. A message from Olivia. "How did it go?" James read it. Then typed, "We need to talk." Across the city, Courtney Bennett sat in a conference room that overlooked a different part of Boston. The space was quiet, reserved. Daniel Brooks sat across from her, a set of documents open in front of him. "Initial responses are coming in," he said. Courtney nodded. "And they're adjusting," he replied. "Institutions' partners. Anyone connected to the previous structure is updating their records." Courtney's gaze remained steady. No resistance. "None that holds," Daniel said. "Everything is supported." He paused, then added, "You may receive direct contact from Mr. Bennett." Courtney did not respond immediately. When she did, her tone remained unchanged. "If he reaches out, we proceed as planned." Daniel inclined his head. "Understood." Courtney looked down at the documents briefly, then closed the folder. The process had moved into its next phase, not escalation, recognition. Outside the window, the city continued its movement, unaware, unchanged. But within the structures that governed it, shifts had already taken place. And those shifts did not require acknowledgement to remain in effect. Courtney stood. "Let me know when the next step is ready," she said. "It already is," Daniel replied. She nodded once, then left the room. In another part of the city, James Bennett entered his car, the documents placed beside him, his phone still in his hand. For the first time since the email had arrived, he did not reach for another call. He did not search for another confirmation. He sat, still. As the reality of his position settled, not as a sudden collapse, but as a gradual recognition of limits that had already been defined. And limits once defined did not negotiate. They remained until something changed, or until there was nothing left to change them with. The meeting had been scheduled weeks in advance. At the time, James Bennett had expected to lead it. The invitation had been sent under his firm's letterhead, the agenda structured around a proposed expansion that required alignment between multiple partners, private equity representatives, institutional investors, and two firms, whose involvement would determine whether the project moved forward or remained theoretical. Now the room was the same. The participants were the same, but the structure had changed. James arrived 10 minutes early, not out of preparation, out of necessity. He entered the conference room and paused briefly at the threshold, his attention moving across the table, the chairs, the placement of documents already arranged at each seat. The space had been set with precision folders, aligned water glasses positioned evenly, screens ready for presentation. Nothing in the room reflected uncertainty. That more than anything unsettled him. Olivia stood near the far end of the table, reviewing a printed version of the agenda. She looked up as he entered, her expression composed but attentive. "They're all confirmed," she said. James nodded. "Good." He moved to his seat at the head of the table, placing his documents down, with controlled care. For a moment, he allowed himself to settle into the position he had anticipated occupying. Then the door opened. The first group entered, two representatives from a Boston-based investment firm. They greeted James with professional courtesy, their tone consistent, their expressions neutral. "James," one of them said. "Good to see you." "You as well," James replied. They took their seats. A second group followed, then a third. Each arrival followed the same pattern, greetings exchanged, positions taken, documents reviewed. No one referenced the delays. No one mentioned the recent communications. The room filled gradually, the conversation remaining surface level, contained within the boundaries of professional expectation. At exactly 9 o'clock, the final participant entered, Courtney Bennett. She did not arrive with an introduction. She did not require one. Her presence altered the room in a way that was not immediate, but unmistakable. Conversations paused not abruptly, but in recognition. Attention shifted not dramatically, but collectively. She wore a tailored, light-colored suit, structured but understated. Her posture remained steady, her movement unhurried. She carried no visible documents, only a small folder. James remained seated. For a fraction of a second, the distance between expectation and reality aligned. Then shifted. Courtney took a seat midway along the table. Not at the head, not at the edge, positioned. Daniel Brooks entered behind her, taking a seat slightly to her right. James's attention moved between them. Courtney, he said. Her name was spoken without emphasis. She looked at him. James. No additional acknowledgement followed. The room settled. One of the senior partners cleared his throat slightly. "Shall we begin?" he said. James inclined his head. "Yes." He reached for the agenda, his hand steady as he opened the document. "We're here to finalize the terms of the proposed expansion," he began. As outlined, the structure relies on coordinated capital allocation across. "We've reviewed the structure," another voice said. James paused. The interruption was not aggressive, but it was precise. The speaker, a representative from the second firm, continued. "What we need to clarify is the current ownership alignment." The room remained still. James closed the folder slowly. "The alignment is as presented," he said. The representative glanced down at his own documents. "That's not consistent with the updates we received yesterday." A brief silence followed. James's gaze shifted across the table. "What updates?" he asked. Daniel Brooks spoke then. "The updates reflecting current ownership structures," he said. His tone was neutral, informational. James turned toward him. And Daniel did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked toward Courtney. She inclined her head slightly. A minimal gesture, but sufficient. Daniel opened the folder in front of him. As of 3 weeks ago, he said the controlling interests in the assets referenced within this proposal were transferred under the Bennett Trust structure. He paused. "Those interests are now held by Miss Courtney Bennett." The words settled into the room without resistance. Not because they lacked impact, because they were already understood. The representatives around the table did not react with surprise. They adjusted, subtly. Papers shifted. Postures aligned. James remained still. For a moment it appeared as if the information had not registered. Then he spoke. "That's not correct," he said. The tone was controlled, but it lacked the certainty it had carried earlier. Daniel met his gaze. "It is," he replied. "The documentation has been distributed." James looked around the table. No one contradicted the statement. No one hesitated. The structure had already been accepted. He turned back to Courtney. "You knew," he said. Her expression did not change. "I was informed," she replied. The distinction remained. James exhaled. "And you didn't think to mention it?" Courtney held his gaze. There was nothing to mention. The answer was not dismissive. It was exact. James's hand moved slightly against the table. "The entire proposal is built on those assets," he said. Courtney nodded once. "Yes. And now you're saying I'm confirming," she said. The interruption was quiet, but it redirected the conversation. James stopped. The room remained still. Then one of the senior partners spoke again. In light of this clarification, he said, "We need to adjust the structure." He turned slightly toward Courtney. "Miss Bennett, are you prepared to proceed?" Courtney inclined her head. Yes. The word carried no emphasis, no assertion, only position. The partner nodded. Then we can continue. James looked at the table, at the documents, at the structure he had expected to lead, now realigned, not removed, reassigned. He did not speak again. The meeting continued. Terms were reviewed, conditions adjusted, language refined. Courtney participated when necessary, not frequently, but precisely. Each contribution aligned with the structure already in place. Daniel provided clarification where required. The representatives responded accordingly. No one addressed James directly, not out of exclusion, out of recognition. His position had changed, and the room had already adjusted to it. By the time the meeting concluded, the proposal remained intact, but its control had shifted completely. Courtney closed her folder and stood. The others followed. Chairs moved, documents gathered. Conversations resumed at a lower volume, now oriented around next steps rather than initial alignment. James remained seated for a moment longer. Then he stood. Courtney moved toward the door. James stepped forward. Courtney. She stopped, turned. He held her gaze. There were words available to him. Questions, accusations, explanations. He did not use them. Instead, "When were you going to tell me?" Courtney considered the question briefly. Then, when it became relevant, the answer held. Without adjustment, without apology. James nodded once. A minimal acknowledgement. Then he stepped aside. Courtney exited the room. Daniel followed. The others dispersed gradually, their attention already shifting toward implementation. James remained, standing, in a room that had not changed, but no longer held his position within it. The calls slowed before they stopped. That was how the shift revealed itself in the days following the meeting. At first, there were still responses, shorter, more measured. Requests for clarification that led nowhere. Follow-ups that extended without resolution. Then gradually the intervals between them lengthened, until silence replaced delay. James Bennett noticed it in the way his phone remained still during hours that had once been defined by interruption. No incoming calls from numbers he recognized. No messages requesting updates. No urgency directed toward him. Only absence. He sat in the apartment late one afternoon, the same documents from the meeting spread across the table, though their relevance had diminished with each passing hour. The structure they outlined was no longer his to interpret. Across the room, Olivia Grant stood near the window, her attention directed outward but not engaged with the view. "They've moved on," she said. The statement was quiet, not accusatory, not surprised. James did not look up immediately. "They're adjusting," he replied. Olivia turned to what James closed the folder in front of him, to the new structure. Olivia watched him for a moment. "And where does that leave us?" James leaned back in his chair. "We find another path." The words came automatically, familiar. But the conviction behind them had shifted. Olivia walked back toward the table, resting her hands lightly against its edge. "With what capital?" she asked. James did not answer. Not because he lacked options, because the options he had assumed were available had not materialized. Olivia waited. When the silence extended, she exhaled slowly. "I need clarity," she said. James looked at her. "You have it?" "No," she replied. "I have pieces of it." She straightened slightly. "I need to know if we're continuing this, or if we're adjusting expectations." The phrasing was deliberate, professional. James recognized it. He had used similar language in conversations that required separation without conflict. "We're continuing," he said. Olivia held his gaze, based on what James's hand moved slightly against the table. "We still have contacts, opportunities." Olivia nodded once. And access. The word remained, unanswered. James looked away. That was enough. Olivia stepped back. The distance between them shifted, not dramatically, but with definition. "I'll review my position," she said. James did not respond. He did not ask what that meant. He understood. Olivia moved toward the door, pausing briefly before opening it. "For what it's worth," she added, "this wasn't unpredictable." Then she left. The door closed quietly behind her. James remained seated. The room held the same arrangement, the same surfaces, the same documents. But without movement, without conversation, the space felt different. Not empty, final. The notice arrived the next morning. Formal. Delivered electronically and by courier. James opened it at the kitchen counter, his attention focused on the language as it unfolded line by line. Notice of outstanding obligations. Failure to meet revised conditions. Immediate review of liabilities. The wording was precise, not aggressive, but definitive. He read through the entire document without interruption. Then he set it down. There was no visible reaction, no movement, only stillness. Across the city, Courtney Bennett received a different set of updates. Daniel Brooks had sent a summary early that morning outlining the progression of adjustments across all connected entities. All parties have acknowledged the revised ownership structure. Contracts updated, access points secured, no outstanding disputes. Courtney reviewed the message once, then closed it. There was nothing further to confirm. The process had moved beyond verification. Into resolution, she stood by the window of her office, the city stretching below in quiet continuity. The same movement, the same rhythm. Nothing external reflected the changes that had already been absorbed into the structures beneath it. Her phone remained on the desk behind her. It vibrated once, then again. She did not turn immediately. When she did, she saw the name. James. The call continued for several seconds, then ended. A message followed. "We need to talk," Courtney read it. Then placed the phone back down. She did not respond. Not yet. The meeting took place later that afternoon. Not in an office, not in a formal setting, but in a quiet cafe several blocks from the townhouse. Neutral, public, contained. James arrived first. He chose a table near the window. His posture controlled his attention directed toward the entrance. Courtney arrived precisely on time. She entered without hesitation, her movement steady, her expression unchanged. James stood as she approached. She took the seat across from him. No greeting followed. The space between them held the weight of what had already been established. "You knew," James said. The words were direct, not raised, but immediate. Courtney met his gaze. Yes, the answer did not expand. It did not require explanation. James exhaled slowly. "And you let it happen." Courtney considered the phrasing. "I didn't stop it," she said. The distinction remained. James leaned forward slightly. "That's the same thing." "No," she replied. "It isn't." A brief silence followed. The sounds of the cafe continued around them, quiet conversations, the movement of cups against tables, the low hum of a space that remained unaffected by their exchange. James looked down briefly, then back at her. "I would have approached things differently," he said. Courtney did not respond immediately. When she did, her tone remained unchanged. "You approached them the way you chose to." The words settled. Without emphasis, without accusation. James's hand moved slightly against the table. "You could have said something." Courtney held his gaze. "Would it have changed your decision?" The question remained, unanswered. James looked away. That too was an answer. He exhaled again, slower this time. I didn't expect this, he said. Courtney inclined her head slightly. No, she said. You didn't. The conversation paused. Not unresolved. Complete. James leaned back in his chair. For a moment it seemed as if he might say something more, but the structure of the exchange had already defined its limits. Courtney stood. James looked up. That's it, he asked. Courtney regarded him for a moment. There's nothing left to clarify, she said. The statement was not final. It was accurate. James nodded once. A minimal acknowledgement. Courtney turned and walked toward the door. She did not look back. James remained seated. The cafe continued around him, unchanged. But the structure he had once occupied, within his work, within his relationships, within the assumptions he had built, had shifted completely. Not through confrontation, not through force, but through alignment. And alignment, once established, did not require defense. It simply remained. The weeks that followed did not announce themselves as a transition. They moved quietly, measured not by events, but by stability. Courtney Bennett's schedule adjusted in ways that appeared minimal from the outside, but were precise in execution. Appointments replaced meetings. Medical reviews replaced financial briefings. The rhythm of her days shifted from coordination to preparation, not as a reduction, but as a reallocation of attention. The townhouse remained her primary residence, unchanged in structure, reconfigured in function. The study once occupied by James's work became a space for review. Not constant activity, but periodic engagement. Documents arrived, were assessed, and were filed. Decisions were made without urgency. Adjustments were implemented without disruption. Daniel Brooks visited once a week, always at the same time, always with updated reports. He did not bring unnecessary commentary, only information. All accounts remained stable, he said during one of their meetings, seated across from her at the dining table. Courtney reviewed the summary. And the external responses consistent, Daniel replied. All parties have adjusted to the current structure. No new challenges. Courtney nodded once, and James Daniel paused briefly. There have been further notices, he said. Outstanding obligations, revisions to previous agreements. Courtney did not look up immediately. Any legal action not from our side, Daniel said, and none directed toward you. Courtney closed the report. Maintain position, she said. Daniel inclined his head. Of course. He gathered his documents, leaving a single folder behind. For your review, he added. Courtney placed it beside her. Thank you. Daniel stood, adjusted his jacket, and left without further comment. The door closed softly behind him. Courtney remained seated for a moment longer, her hand resting lightly against the edge of the table. Then she stood and moved toward the window. Outside, the city had begun to shift into late autumn. The light arrived later, lingered shorter. The air carried a different clarity, sharper, more defined. Nothing in the movement of the street reflected disruption. Continuity remained. At the hospital, the environment was different. Not quieter, but more contained. Courtney sat in the examination room, the same one she had occupied weeks earlier, though the context had changed entirely. Dr. Melissa Harris reviewed the latest imaging results, her expression focused but calm. All three are progressing well, she said. Measurements are consistent. No irregularities. Courtney inclined her head. Thank you. Dr. Harris glanced up. You've maintained excellent stability, she added. That makes a difference. Courtney did not respond immediately. Then I've followed the recommendations. Dr. Harris smiled slightly. It shows. The nurse adjusted the monitor, the familiar rhythm of 3 heartbeats filling the room once again. Steady, distinct, aligned. Courtney closed her eyes briefly. Not from fatigue, from acknowledgement. When she opened them, Dr. Harris had set the tablet aside. We'll begin preparing for delivery, she said. With multiples, we plan carefully. Timing, resources, support. Courtney nodded. I understand. Do you have someone who will be present? Dr. Harris asked. The question was practical, expected. Courtney considered it for a moment. Then yes. The answer was simple, not elaborated. Dr. Harris did not press further. We'll coordinate everything, she said. You won't need to manage the details. Courtney inclined her head again. Thank you. Across the city, James Bennett's schedule had narrowed. Not by choice, by limitation. The apartment remained partially furnished, though now it carried a different tone. Not transitional, static. He sat at the same table where documents had once been spread, though now the surface remained mostly clear. A single folder rested in front of him, unopened. The phone remained nearby, silent. Olivia had not returned. Her absence had not been formalized. It had simply occurred. James did not attempt to contact her again. There were other matters requiring attention. He reached for the folder, opened it, and read through the contents. Revised terms, outstanding balances, deadlines. The language was consistent with what he had already received. Nothing new, only continuation. He closed the folder and set it aside. For a moment he remained still, not searching for solutions, not reviewing options, just present within the structure that had settled around him. The absence of movement did not create resolution. It revealed it. Back at the townhouse, Courtney prepared a different kind of structure. Not legal, not financial, physical. The nursery had been arranged gradually, each element placed with consideration rather than urgency. 3 cribs aligned along one wall. Soft lighting positioned to avoid harsh shadows. Storage organized without excess. Nothing in the room suggested anticipation. Only readiness. Courtney stood in the doorway, her hand resting lightly against the frame. The space was complete, not in decoration, in function. She stepped inside, moving slowly, her attention shifting from one detail to the next. Each element had been chosen for stability, for continuity, not for display. She adjusted a blanket slightly, ensuring it lay flat against the surface. Then she stepped back. The room held, unchanged, prepared. The call came 2 days later, early afternoon. Courtney was seated in the living room when her phone vibrated. A number she did not recognize. She answered, Courtney Bennett. A brief pause. Then, this is Dr. Harris's office. We'd like you to come in today. Earlier than scheduled. Courtney's posture did not change. Is there a concern? Not a concern, the voice said. A precaution. We'd prefer to monitor you in person. Courtney nodded, though the gesture was unseen. I'll be there. She ended the call and stood. There was no urgency in her movement, only sequence. She gathered what she needed, placed her phone in her bag, and moved toward the door. The house remained quiet as she left. The structure intact, the timing once again aligned. At the hospital, the environment shifted slightly, not dramatically. But with intention, Courtney was escorted to a private room, the staff moving with quiet efficiency. Monitors were set, vitals checked. The same controlled rhythm as before, but with increased attention. Dr. Harris entered shortly after. We're going to keep you here for observation, she said. Everything looks stable, but with 3, we don't take chances. Courtney nodded. I understand. The nurse adjusted the monitor once more. 3 heartbeats, steady, consistent. Courtney rested her hand over her abdomen. The movement beneath her skin remained calm, aligned. Outside the room, the hospital continued its function. Inside, the next phase had begun, not with urgency, with precision. And as the structure of her life shifted once more from preparation to arrival, Courtney remained exactly where she had always been. present, composed, ready. The hospital room held a different kind of quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of attention. Courtney Bennett remained in the same position she had been in for hours. Her body supported her breathing steady, her focus contained within the rhythm that now defined everything else. The monitors beside her displayed consistent readings, each line moving with measured precision. Dr. Melissa Harris stood near the foot of the bed, reviewing the latest updates. "We're within range," she said to the nurse. "No deviations." Courtney listened without interrupting. The language was familiar, structured, reassuring without being overstated. Time had narrowed into intervals. Not minutes, moments, each one aligned with the next. The decision to proceed had been made without urgency. Not because the situation lacked importance, but because it had been anticipated, prepared for. Everything in the room reflected that preparation. Staff moved with quiet coordination. Instruments were arranged before they were needed. Instructions were given in tones that did not require repetition. Courtney remained still, not passive, present. Her hand rested lightly against her abdomen, the same gesture she had maintained through every phase of the process. 3 heartbeats had guided her through uncertainty, through transition, through silence. Now they remained. Steady, unbroken. Dr. Harris stepped closer. "We're going to move forward," she said. "Everything is ready." Courtney inclined her head. There were no additional questions, no hesitation. The transition began. Time moved differently after that, measured not by sequence, but by response. Each instruction carried purpose. Each adjustment followed a pattern already established. Courtney did not resist the process. She aligned with it. The room remained controlled, focused. Outside the hospital continued its routine. Patients arrived, moved, departed. Conversations occurred in corridors, voices rising and falling without connection to the moment unfolding within this room. Inside the structure held. The first cry came quietly, not dramatic, but distinct, a sound that confirmed presence. Then another, then a third. Each one separate, each one complete. Dr. Harris's voice followed. "All stable," she said. The nurse responded with a nod. Courtney closed her eyes briefly, not in exhaustion, in acknowledgement. When she opened them, the room had shifted. 3 small forms, each attended to with careful precision, each movement aligned with the same standard that had defined everything leading up to this point. Courtney's gaze moved from one to the next. No urgency, no overwhelming reaction, just recognition. They had arrived. The hours that followed were quieter, measured. The intensity of the moment gave way to a different kind of stillness. The room remained controlled, but the focus had shifted from action to continuity. Courtney remained in bed. Her posture supported her attention divided between rest and observation. The nurse moved in and out, checking readings, adjusting positions, maintaining the environment without disruption. Dr. Harris returned briefly. "All 3 are doing well," she said. "Strong, responsive. We'll continue monitoring, but there are no concerns." Courtney inclined her head. "Thank you." Dr. Harris paused for a moment, then added, "You handled this with exceptional stability." Courtney did not respond immediately. Then it was prepared. Dr. Harris smiled slightly. "Yes," she said. "It was." She left the room quietly. Courtney remained. The space around her no longer held anticipation, only presence. Across the city, James Bennett received the update indirectly, not through a call, not through a message, but through a shared contact who mentioned it in passing without emphasis, as part of a broader conversation that no longer centered on him. Courtney Bennett, the contact said. She had the children, triplets. James listened. There was no immediate response. The information settled. not as surprise, as confirmation. He nodded once. "That's good," he said. The conversation moved on. Other topics, other concerns. James remained present but not engaged. His position within the discussion had shifted in the same way it had shifted everywhere else. Not removed. Repositioned. Back at the hospital, the evening light had begun to soften. Courtney sat upright now, supported by pillows, her gaze steady as she looked toward the 3 bassinets positioned nearby. Each one held a small, quiet presence, movement, breathing, continuity. The nurse adjusted one of the blankets, ensuring it remained secure. "Do you need anything?" she asked. Courtney shook her head slightly. "No." The nurse nodded and stepped back. The room remained still. Courtney reached for her phone, which had remained on the table beside her throughout the day. There were messages, notifications, updates. She did not open them immediately. Instead, she looked once more toward the bassinets. 3 heartbeats had become 3 lives, separate, defined, aligned. Only then did she turn her attention to the screen. A message from Daniel Brooks. All processes complete. No outstanding actions required. Courtney read it once, then set the phone down. There was nothing further to confirm. The structure had reached its conclusion, not through conflict, not through reversal, through completion. The townhouse remained unchanged, prepared. When Courtney returned several days later, the transition into that space occurred without disruption. The nursery, already arranged, now held its purpose. The rest of the house followed. Rooms remained as they had been, but their function had shifted. The study no longer required review. The dining table no longer held documents. The space had returned to stillness, not emptiness, completion. Courtney moved through it slowly, her attention focused not on what had been, but on what remained. Each step aligned with the same precision that had guided every decision. No excess, no omission, only continuation. In another part of the city, James Bennett packed the last of his remaining documents into a single box. The apartment had already begun to empty. Not entirely, but enough to indicate transition. He moved through the space without urgency, placing each item where it belonged, closing drawers, aligning edges. There was no visible frustration, no outward reaction, only recognition. The process had reached its own conclusion, not as defined, not as structured, but complete. He paused near the window one final time, looking out at the city that had once reflected his movement. Now it remained unchanged, as it always had. He did not linger. He turned, picked up the box, and left. Back at the townhouse, evening settled quietly. Courtney stood in the doorway of the nursery, her hand resting lightly against the frame. Inside the room remained calm. 3 small lives, each moving within their own rhythm, unaffected by what had come before. Courtney did not step inside immediately. She remained where she was observing, not as reflection, as presence. There was nothing left to resolve, nothing left to reclaim. Only what had been built, and what would continue. She stepped forward then, entering the room without hesitation. The door remained open behind her. The story does not end with a moment of victory. It settles into something quieter, more lasting. Courtney Bennett never raised her voice. She never argued for recognition. She never needed to explain what she already understood. While others reacted, she observed. While others rushed, she waited. And when the moment came, she did not take anything back. She simply stood where everything had already been placed. There is a difference between losing something and realizing it was never yours to hold. James Bennett did not fall in a single moment. There was no dramatic collapse, no public unraveling. Only a series of realizations, each one quieter than the last, until the structure he believed in no longer responded to him. And that is often how consequences arrive. Not loudly, but precisely. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to reflect on where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Every place has its own rhythm, its own timing, its own turning points. If you believe in quiet strength and patience, in the kind of justice that doesn't need to announce itself, you are already part of this story. And if you would like to hear more stories like this, stories that unfold slowly, that reveal themselves piece by piece, then you are welcome to stay, to listen, and to return again.